All right, so for the panelists, Allison, if you want to start, if you just want to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to ask the panelists a few questions today, and then we're going to open up to the students. So if you have any questions throughout the time of this panel, feel free to type them into the chat box, and I can read them out to the panelists afterwards.
Sure. Hi, guys. My name is Allison. I graduated in 2017. My majors were international affairs and journalism. I am in school right now again, so I get the whole Zoom class, well, Teams, whatever you use, the whole screen class situation. I feel that. I am in grad school right now in a program in New York at the City University of New York called a Master's in Social Journalism. So the whole idea is to figure out ways to make journalism more of a service to people in communities, and instead of just a product, and figure out new ways to make journalism more useful. And I'm back in Milwaukee though right now because of quarantine, and also because I will be staying in Milwaukee for the summer working on a new texting news service that I can chat about in a sec. I'm excited to talk with you guys.
Thanks, Sally. Mike?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Zuckler. First off, congratulations to all the graduating seniors. Strange time to be graduating, but best of luck in what's ahead. So I graduated way back in 2010. I was a Peace Studies major and an English minor. And I've had quite a few different things that I've done since graduation. So I'll name them pretty quickly just in case you guys have interest in any of these areas. So I started after graduation, I worked on a Catholic worker farm in California, if any of you are familiar with the Catholic worker movement, for a year. I then afterwards went to Detroit, and I did Teach for America in Detroit for just a few months, and then I quit. So I'm also happy to talk about failures that I've experienced as well, or learning experiences. But while in Detroit, I then worked with a few other people to establish a daytime hospitality center for individuals who are homeless. I was in Detroit for a couple years, moved back to Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee, and I did a brief internship at Growing Power and Urban Farm, which I believe is no longer in existence. But then spent the bulk of my time in Milwaukee working at the Urban Ecology Center. And I'm happy to explain more about what that is if you're not familiar. But I work to engage the community in engaging nature at the Urban Ecology Center. After 3 years at the Urban Ecology Center, I decided to go back to graduate school for my master's in social work, where I focus on working with refugees and then also did clinical mental health. And now I am currently living in St. Louis, where I've been here for about 2.5, almost 3 years, working for an affordable housing nonprofit where most of my work is centered around an eviction prevention program. And currently I am actually at a friend's cabin. I'm fortunate enough to be able to work remotely, so that's this pretty backdrop. Aside from all that, I really like being outside. I like running, I like writing, I like cooking. I have 2 really awesome dogs. And lately I've been into eating grapefruit a lot. I really like grapefruit. So, thank you.
Wait, me too. That's been my quarantine food. I've eaten a grapefruit a day. I don't know where it came from. It's like a weird quarantine thing.
Wow.
Who knows? Yeah.
Right
on.
I'm Sophia Torrijos, and I do not like grapefruit, so that has not been my quarantine food. More like a lot of mac and cheese because I need comfort food right now. I'm not originally from Milwaukee, so I'm still from the Midwest. So my mom is from Iowa and my dad is from Spain. So I grew up in both countries until I went to Marquette, where I graduated in 2016 with degrees in, it's like I have to like remember, history, political science, international affairs, and a minor in Spanish. And yeah, while I was at Marquette, I did a whole bunch of stuff, but right after I graduated, I did a year of service with AmeriCorps, actually at Freedom's Food Pantries, and that is where I am working currently. So it was kind of a fun circular journey. But right after I did my year of service, I ran a program on Milwaukee's South Side called Muskego Way Forward, Adelante Muskego Way. So we were doing community development work with neighbors and building their leadership capacity and community organizing, and then connecting them with funders and other nonprofit types to work on quality of life issues for the neighborhood. So that was super awesome, and I really kind of, for me, opened up a whole new window into immigrant rights and capacity building on the neighborhood level. And then while I loved what I was doing, I kind of, way before I was expecting it, kind of got offered my dream job as the executive director at Freedom's Food Pantries. So I came back to Freedom's, and I've been in this role about a year now. But we're a really small nonprofit with a huge impact because we have 4 food pantry networks across the city, but we're a really small staff. So I'm living the really glamorous nonprofit life where you're the executive director, but you still like mop floors and, you know, do a lot of stuff yourself. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to everybody and hopefully share about some of my experiences.
Cool, thank you. So we're going to start with Allie. Allie, the first question I wanted to ask you was, how did your Marquette experience shape and prepare you for the career that you have in journalism?
Yeah, for sure. So also, I don't know, I'm not usually a shy person at all, but somehow speaking on the screens always makes me kind of nervous. So sorry if I seem kind of nervous, I'll chill out in a second. But okay, so my experience at Marquette, well, I didn't do journalism right out of school too. I didn't really explain my trajectory right out of school, but I can do that in a sec. But at Marquette, at first I started studying international affairs, and I thought I wanted to do international human rights law. That was kind of my goal going into school. And then throughout my time at Marquette, I felt really connected to the Milwaukee community, got really plugged in with some great work happening locally in Milwaukee, and that really kind of shifted my whole perspective on how change. Well, I think change can happen in a lot of ways, but I guess more so like the position I saw myself in creating change became much more localized. And I worked at a nonprofit youth leadership organization called Urban Underground. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. And I started out just tutoring high school students when I was a freshman, which was kind of a weird thing because I was only a year older than some of them. But and then I kind of just never left. So I stayed at Urban Underground and started kind of leading different programs. We made a youth magazine one summer, and I learned so much about Milwaukee from the young people I was able to work with. They were creating projects and doing different things to make change in their own communities. So I was going to all sorts of events in Milwaukee with these students, and just kind of generally my job was like driving the 12-passenger van, and then they would do all the cool stuff. And I got to learn so much from that. I dropped my pen. I want to say I was also super involved with Midnight Run, so I don't know if any of you guys are in Midnight Run, but that was really transformative. So I guess basically this whole idea of going abroad changed pretty quickly. Also, I went abroad. I went to South Africa, and that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, but it also made me want to be from a place and to build like deep. I just learned the value of deep relationships, and I think change happens at the speed of relationships. And I think like to do that, you have to really invest in a place and the people there. The question was, how did that get me to journalism? I declared a journalism major randomly because I like to write and I thought it seemed more realistic than English, which is a joke because, you know, the journalism industry is probably the least reliable industry in the world. And that really became something that I fell in love with when I started working for the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service when I was at Marquette. So I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's a really cool nonprofit news organization based at Marquette in Johnston Hall. It's called Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service, or NNS, and they cover 17 neighborhoods in the city of Milwaukee that have historically been undercovered by mainstream media. And working with them as an intern for a while was really exciting to me, and it made me think about journalism in whole new ways. It made me think about journalism in the context of like systems and power and who gets to affect change in systems and whose voices get to be prioritized when those decisions are made. And yeah, so I left college pretty confused, honestly. Like, I didn't leave knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I also did a year of service. I think that's just a commonality among all of us. I wasn't ready to go right into a newsroom. I had a lot of concerns and frustrations about the way that traditional news media worked, and that wasn't necessarily a place that I saw myself in. So I moved away. I went to California. I did a year of service through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps program. I worked at an alternative high school in Oakland, so all my students were young adults who, for whatever reason, didn't complete high school the first time around and had chosen to come back as young adults and get their diploma. And then I really, really missed journalism, and at that point, I decided that I wanted to work in journalism, but to figure out a way that I could do so and still live within my values, and I can talk more about that later. But that was I don't know if that was the question, but yeah.
Thanks, Sally. So, Mike, I thought we could go to you next. And I'm curious how your peace studies education and experience that you had at Marquette prepared you for the work that you're doing in social work.
Sure. So I'm going to echo a fair amount of certain things that Allison said. But first, I think one of the initial reasons why I chose a peace studies major, admittedly, is I don't like being pigeonholed. I like having a pretty broad and a lot of lateral space in how I move forward with making decisions. I think I might have also been one of, I don't know, but the latest declared peace studies major. I wasn't officially declared until like the end of first semester of my senior year. But I think that it was in part, a lot of my peace studies experience was, you know, in the classroom, conversations that were had related to curriculum, what we were studying, the topics of the class. I'll get to that in a second, but like some of the things that left an impression on me and that still more or less guide my work, liberation theology, Catholic social teaching. Even though I'm actually not, I don't practice any sort of religion at the moment, a lot of those kind of ideological structures really shaped the way that it was a lens through which I view the world. But I think maybe most importantly and most formative were the relationships that I had with teachers, with friends in the class, also kind of as Allison alluded to with Midnight Run. I was a Burke Scholar, so I had to do service each semester, had to, but that was very formative. The opportunities I had outside of the classroom to engage with the community, and also to wrestle with the questions of a lot of the work that we were doing in those service programs was a lot more, I guess, like charity oriented. And I don't think it's super helpful to make this distinction between strict charity and strict advocacy, because I think there's a lot of intersection. But it did, I would bring that work back to my classes and discuss kind of the structural implications that I was seeing every day out, doing the work that I was doing in the community. So I think the relationships I formed with my friends in the classes, other peace studies majors, other people who I met through the different service or justice programs on campus, also with some of the teachers who I still talk to, and who I still think about things that they said, and some of the things, some of the tenets of the Catholic worker movement, and even thinking about the preferential option for the poor that is pretty central to Catholic social teaching, I think also, even though I wouldn't name it as such, underlies a lot of the work that I do. I think for those of you who haven't discussed too much a preferential option for the poor, it's kind of the idea of putting the people who are the most marginalized or the most oppressed at the forefront of your decision making as a society. And I think that that's been something that I can't seem to get away from. The work that I do almost inherently feels like it has to relate to better outcomes for people who are at the margins of society, which led me in a way towards social work. And I'm happy to talk later about social work as a next step for some students who are considering that in graduate school. But I think that after having such a broad scope with the peace studies major and then doing a bunch of different things after college, it was helpful to kind of fine tune or develop a more concrete skill set through graduate school. And I think those two paired together pretty well. So I think peace studies gave me a lot of the lenses, relationships, and formative experiences that were then turned kind of into a skill set that I have now that I can bring to my work. So also I studied abroad in South Africa like Allison, and that was a great experience and formative as well. So.
Cool, thanks, Mike. So for Sophia, I know that when you and I were chatting earlier, you had talked about how important mentors were for you during your Marquette experience. I'm curious if you could touch on that and how you went about building mentorship opportunities.
Yeah, I think that at Marquette, if I'm being honest, the first probably 2 or 3 years, I felt like I really struggled to kind of find my niche and my people. And as you can probably tell by how many majors I picked up, I was just kind of all over the place. And mostly, I'll be honest, mostly spent a lot of time on campus. Right around my junior year is when I, again, kind of just accidentally, I was not really following any plan at the time. I started working at the Marquette Center for Community Service, and this sort of started to, I guess, open up a new world for me where I think I finally started to connect with people who I really felt like we shared values, and really it was, I think, a lot of where I am today is simply because at that point I just started to who do I really admire and who is really inspiring me and who do I want to be more like? And then I just kind of found those people and decided I wanted to spend a lot more time with those people. And so it was really kind of a relationship-based thrust forward in my life, if you will. And for me, I've been really fortunate, I guess, to just really click with some of my supervisors. And so Kelly Walker, who's still at Marquette, was a really inspiring person to me, just because I think that she really helped me start to bridge life outside of Marquette. And I think that when I started to get a little bit more involved in life outside of the campus bubble, that's when I think things really picked up speed for me and they started to change. And so it's not that Marquette didn't necessarily prepare me, but I think it was all the stuff that I was doing outside of Marquette in combination with, you're learning all this theoretical knowledge at Marquette, and that's really great. But until I was able to put some of that into practice and connect the dots, it was really hard for me to kind of really get the why behind what we're all doing on campus. And so one of the things that specifically for me was really, really key was honestly just taking the initiative and calling up the executive director at Freedom's at the time, and I just cold called her. I'd never even volunteered with the organization. I just kind of heard from people that I respected that, hey, this is an organization that's really like doing the work right. This is a person who is balancing, the nonprofit type responsibilities with real connection with the community. Well, like, you should just get to know her. And so I totally just cold called Catherine, and I was like, hey, I want to create an internship. And so I did. I created this internship, and that kind of led one thing to another. And that internship, I started to create a lot of relationships with community members and folks who really rooted me in the community. And honestly, without those mentors, without those relationships, I never stayed in Milwaukee. Like, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I would have been traveling the world or staying in Milwaukee after Marquette, I fully intended to leave. But it was just really good for me to be brave a little bit, because I don't think I'm always like the most outgoing person, but seeking out folks that teach me a lot is really, really important. I think one of the real things, like one of the real benefits of the Center for Peacemaking specifically, is that there's a lot of opportunities opened up to meet really cool people and get to know really cool things that are happening. But sometimes that exposure is not enough. Like, I think it really takes invested time and intentional reaching out, building relationships over time, which, as Allison mentioned, like, you have to move at the speed of trust, and trust takes time. But I think that's kind of what informed my journey thus far.
Thanks, Sophia. So I'm going to ask each panelist one more question, and then we can open it up to the students. So Allie, you said that you did JVC after you graduated, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and I know that for myself, I did a year of service, and there's so many different options, both domestically and internationally. Why JVC for you, and how did it shape you?
This is a great segue coming off of Sophia talking about mentorship. Mentorship has made the biggest difference for me in so many ways. And also cold calling, honestly, some of the most transformative people in my life I've just cold called. And that's the reason why actually a surprising amount of things have happened. So would recommend. But so it was an older alumni who told me that I should do JVC. Actually, it was a few different people who were older than me. I often turn to older students or alumni. Mike said he was a Burke Scholar. I was also a Burke Scholar, and it was someone who was a senior when I was a freshman and who had actually done international. He was in Tanzania for a few years. Ryan Knott, I don't know if you know Mike, but he had come back to campus and we just got coffee and were chatting, and I was telling him I was thinking about all these different things, and he had just gotten back from JVC and had shared all of these really amazing experiences and just reflections and what that year meant for him, and that kind of was really affirming for me. And then also a friend who I had studied abroad with, who was a year older than me, we were at some conference together, and I was discerning if I wanted to do JVC or not, and she was in the middle of her JV year, and she kind of framed it as we were both pretty over-involved in college, you could say, kind of pulled in a lot of directions, really passionate about a lot of things and learning so much, but also I had kind of realized by the end of college that, one, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and two, the way in which I was working was not sustainable for my mental health or wellness. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I was honestly pretty burnt out by the end of college. But I still wanted to work in pursuit of the things I believed in. And my friend kind of posed JVC almost as a year of rest, which is not necessarily why a lot of people pursue service. But she said, like, this year has been such a great year for me to do work that is meaningful to me, to be surrounded by community that supports me and that I learn from, and also to just have the space to know that you have this window of a year where you're doing something you care about, but you also have the time to really reflect on the whole, like the super saturated experience that is college, and to figure out like what that actually means and what you want to do with all that you learn and all that you've become. So that was kind of how she framed it, and that was exactly what I was looking for. And so that's why I did JVC. I love JVC a lot, and I would be happy to talk with anyone offline about it if we don't have time in this call. And that has been kind of how Mike said, like those philosophies of liberation theology and things like that. A lot of the spiritual framework I got from JVC has been, that was like from Marquette, but was really reinforced and like put in practice in our JVC community and in our house, and that we could come and talk about around the dinner table about our days at work. Like that has been really foundational to kind of the lenses that I view the world with. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess when choosing a service program, if you're interested, like think about my advice would be think about the work, but also think about the rest of the context. Like I don't think anyone had really prepared me for the community aspect of JVC, and that was almost way more, not way more, but that had a really significant impact on my experience and also who I am, like living in a house with 7 strangers and sharing a budget and living on a stipend and all those like things that you maybe don't think about when you think about picking like the service job. I'm using service lightly because I feel like this is a space where we don't need to unpack that at this moment. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about JVC to anyone.
Great, thanks, Allie. So, Mike, earlier you alluded that you went on to get your master's in social work, and I know that quite a few Peace Studies students have expressed interest in that. I'm wondering if you have any tips for students who may be considering a MSW, what your experience was like.
Sure. First, before I begin, I want to just like echo most things that Sophia and Allison are saying. Mentorship has been hugely important, and that's also kind of baked into the experience of getting a master's in social work, supervision. But somebody was once talking to me in the same way that and this was helpful advice I got, the same way that a nonprofit will have a board of directors with people who have legal advice, people who have a connection to the community, people who are experts in their certain fields, to try and create your own board of directors as you kind of move forward in life, people who you can turn to and support you at various times as you have different decision landmarks in your life. And some of those are from Marquette, some of them have been from UWM, some of them are my friends, some of them are people who I know from the work I've done. So I just want to echo mentorship, and you guys have probably already found great mentors, but that's been helpful to me. As far as specifically about an MSW, I'm very glad that I made the decision to get an MSW. I'm not sure if other people are considering it, but I also know that some people will find themselves at an intersection of, do I want to get an MSW? Do I want to go to school? Do I want to get a master's in counseling, potentially law school? One of the advantages of an MSW is that it's a really wide berth. You can do a whole ton with an MSW, which if you are looking for a really specified skill set, you can get that in an MSW. You can kind of hone in, but it is really good for those who have more universalist tendencies and want to do a lot of different things. And I got my MSW at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, so just down the road. And one thing that I was surprised by in getting my MSW is I really didn't. It wasn't too much of a departure from my day-to-day life. I know for some people who go to med school or law school, it can be pretty all-consuming. Like that's all they're doing all the time, and they kind of disappear from the face of the earth for 2 or 3 years. when I was getting my MSW, you know, part of my time was spent in the classroom, part of my time was spent at my practicum sites, which are almost like jobs. It's like, you spend 20 hours a week working at a refugee resettlement agency or at a free health clinic. And I really loved that work. I still had a life, because it's academically demanding, but not so much so as like law school or medical school. So I would say it's pretty integrative of other things that you might want to do just as a person. So I like that about an MSW. Also, MSWs can really do a lot of different things. I mean, they can work in policy advocacy work. They can kind of work on a macro level. You can work on the administrative level. You can work in development, writing grants, or you can spend your whole time on the ground doing clinical work, you can be a clinical social worker, which you need extra licensure for, but that's essentially, you have the same skill set as a therapist. You can work in schools. You can, if there's a population that you're interested in, let's say you're interested in working with immigrants and refugees, you can take that as your focus. If there's a cause that you're really interested in, say housing, you can pick that as your focus. So I'd say there's a lot of breadth and opportunity to develop expertise in, but one of the tenets of social work that I think is helpful is that a pretty humbling idea that you really will never be the true expert in the area that you focus in. Oftentimes, the people that you're working with, one of the things I had to kind of unlearn from my Marquette experience was some of the service that I did kind of puts you on unequal footing. And in social work, a core tenet is that the person who you're working with is an expert in what they're doing. So I would say that within social work, there is the ability to become experienced in an area, but you're not going to become like, a radio oncologist and where you have a very defined skill set. The last piece of advice I would give in far as thinking about how to finance a graduate education is to seek out fellowships as much as possible. That was something that I didn't really know too much about going into applying for graduate school. And somebody tipped me off to that. And basically I was able to work in the office of admissions as a program assistant, which is a type of graduate assistant, and it paid for my education plus a stipend. So in any graduate program that you might seek out, see if there's different fellowships that you could apply for, because it can help financially as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. So Sophia, last question for you. I know for myself and for many students, there is this art of balancing societal expectations, familial expectations of what life is going to look like for you after you graduate, and even preparing for graduation. I'm curious how you balance that with your own goals and visions for your life.
When you realize you're on mute. Yeah, and I guess I want to start by saying that I feel like this hour is also going by super fast. So we've talked a lot about mentorship, and I'm just putting it out there that I'm happy to connect with anybody afterwards. Normally I would say we'd like coffee, but like a one-on-one Zoom hang or something to talk more. I feel like any one of these questions could be an hour, but yeah, I think I come from my family background, as I mentioned. My dad's Spanish, my mom's American, and I have a lot of, I guess, corporate types in my family. And it's crazy how universal the pressure to be like a doctor, lawyer, engineer is. Like, doesn't matter where you are in the world. I feel like your parents maybe set some expectations for you when you're very young. And I'm not even gonna lie, like there was totally a lot of time in college where I just told people I was pre-law to kind of get them off my back. But especially I think when I was doing my year of service, it got a little bit hard because a lot of my peers at Marquette, they were graduating and they were their starting salary was like $60K and I'm making less than minimum wage. And it's really hard to kind of justify that to your family and when you're hanging out with your friends, especially if you have circles that, we all have different circles, and I'm really fortunate to have supportive people in my life who I've met through a lot of my work in the community and at nonprofits. So I definitely leaned on those people for support, but then in other circles, it can be a little hard when you're like, what am I working towards? So it's definitely, I think it's okay to talk about and acknowledge the fact that nonprofit work, especially for entry level, I don't think it's always like as well paid. It's not flashy. It's not glamorous. Like, it's, but I do think that if you kind of play your cards right, it's also a field that you can move up pretty quickly. And it's also a really relationship-based field too. So that was a strategy that I really used, I think, to kind of to my advantage to get the jobs that I wanted. But I guess, I mean, this sounds a little cliche, but just like having trust that this is what makes your life meaningful, right? Like if you can't imagine yourself getting up every day and going to a job that you really hate just for the paycheck, like, this, I think you commit to this, because you like getting up every day and going to a job that's different and exciting, and you're making real connections with people, and you can see the difference that you're making in people's lives, and that's really rewarding. And that's not to say that you can't do that in any field. Like, I know plenty of people who work, maybe they're an accountant, but they serve on a nonprofit board and they're really putting their talents to good use. So I would never ever say that the only way to go is the nonprofit field, but it's something that, surround yourself with good people, have confidence that this is your path, and you can always change too. Like, you do nonprofit work for a while, and you're like, it's not for me. I'm gonna go do something else. So I love that. Like your path is always gonna be. It's not straight and narrow. It's gonna be every which way. Yeah, I answered that.
Thanks, Sophia. So I wanted to give the rest of the time to the students. So if you have any questions directly for our panelists, once again, we have Sophia, Allison, and Mike on the call. Feel free to unmute and ask or type them in the chat box. And if the panelists have any questions for the students too, feel free to ask. But I actually see one question here. Nora asked, what's the hardest thing about working in community-based job? And then the second one is, any advice for seniors who are interested in working in nonprofits after graduation? So that one would be more for Sophia. But for the first question, hardest thing about working in a community-based job? Anybody on the call really can answer that?
I mean, you guys probably have more experience in this than me, but I've spent a fair share of time in community-based jobs, and I feel like the first thing that came to my mind was boundaries, which I think can be a good and bad thing. And by that, I mean, when you're doing work that you care about so much with people who you care about, I've just found like the culture at nonprofits is generally like everyone cares about the work, and there's this expectation that you work until the work is done, and you're kind of overworked, underpaid, to be honest, is like a lot of the experience that I've had personally, which doesn't need to be a bad thing, but it's a reality that you kind of have to grapple with and negotiate for yourself what that's going to look like. But also what I meant with boundaries is when you're doing work that's so connected to what you believe in, I found that there's less of a distinction between like your work self and your personal self. You're kind of showing up to work as your whole self. I don't know if anyone's had that same experience. But for me, that's what I found. And that's really cool. And I want that. I want that consistency, but it also makes it harder to separate from work when you are in other capacities of your life. Like it kind of impact how you see everything. I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe it's kind of an unconventional answer to that question. But I just feel like when the work melds so much with who you are and who you want to be, then you kind of are to be that all the time, and which I like, but it's definitely kind of a choice.
I just want to say I completely agree with Allison's answer. Because, you know, especially when I was doing the community organizing, which I think that once you get involved in that, it's not really like now I'm putting my community organizer hat on, and it just becomes your life and your view of how to do things and how to solve problems. But like, absolutely, you know, it was hard when to really be successful. I think you have to be completely authentic and genuine, and that's really how it's such a trust-based work. And so when you're getting like invited to everyone's quinceañera on the weekends, it feels like you don't know when you know your private time starts and work time starts. But to kind of give I guess like I could talk about that, but I think to give you guys another answer too, I think nonprofits or community-based organizations, anything like that, I think they're perpetually kind of under-resourced, which means that whatever your job description is, just know that there's going to be a lot of other things that get thrown at you. For example, at Freedom's, you know, typically an executive director would mostly do a lot of the strategic direction, the fundraising, the, you know, PR stuff. But I'm also the IT department. I'm like the marketing department. So I had to like self-teach myself lots of stuff because there's also no budget for a lot of professional development. So like right now we're migrating all of our data into a Salesforce, and I'm not a techie person, but you kind of are expected to just get the work done, which is something that at, you know, in other larger companies, for example, like you get a little more support in that way. But it's exciting too, like if you really love learning new things, and if you like a day full of variety, and if, you know, you get bored doing one thing, then it's great. You'll love it and you'll hate it.
Yeah, kind of directly related to that. I kind of take energy from having to wear a lot of different. I spent like 2 hours this morning on Salesforce trying to figure out some like dorky techie stuff to track client outcomes. So this is related to what kind of two things. One related to what Allison was sharing, especially related to social work when you're doing direct either case management or clinical work with your clients. I would find myself, you know, losing sleep at night because a family who I was working with was about to be evicted, and I hadn't heard from them, and they had, you know, their eviction court hearing was going to be the next day, and I like felt like I was the one, you know, who's about to lose my home. And so separating yourself from the outcomes of the families that you're working with and realizing what's in and out of your control, it takes you know, technique, strategy, but also support from other people as well. So that is a difficult thing if you're working directly with community. Another thing too is the 1,000 jobs that you're not doing and not feeling guilty about not doing those jobs. So it's like, why am I not working in criminal justice reform? Why am I not working on the front lines of the environment movement? Why am I not doing all these things? That can come up a lot for me in the work that I do. One thing that I've found to be a helpful anecdote to that is collaboration, and realizing how interwoven a lot of that work is. So really working to bring all those voices to the table has been helpful, but a lot of times I'm like, oh, should I switch over to this job? So that's something that I find difficult in community work, or is a challenge for me.
Another great question that was asked in the chat box is, for those who studied international affairs, and maybe Mike, you can jump on this as well, do you think that students should consider working at local nonprofits before pursuing global ones?
I can go, but if someone else feels more compelled, please go for it. Okay. I think that kind of depends totally on the person. I guess the short answer is no, not necessarily. If you feel like you want, like you know that you want to work internationally and you want to work in an international capacity and you're very confident about that, like there's no, like in a very straightforward as far as like job path, like you would be able to get an entry-level job in a global, like in an international capacity if you wanted to, I would guess. So it's kind of just what you feel called to, or what makes sense to you. From my personal experience, like working locally changed everything about how I see the world. And that's been like really powerful, and I wouldn't trade that, but that's me and like my experience. There's a ton of really important work happening at an international level that you totally could enter into, I guess. Yeah, like there's, yeah, I guess that's not really a great answer because I don't have that experience, but I know people who have and who do, and it's totally possible. So if the question was if it's possible, the answer is yes. If the question is if you should, that's totally for you to find. There's lots of great work that needs to happen at every level. So
the only thing that I would add, I don't have too much experience. I've lived abroad a couple of times. I don't necessarily know professionally the answer to that, but I know personally, I think it's important to have developed skills of self-reflection before you enter work with another, and this can go within the same city. It doesn't have to be international, but before you engage in work in another culture, and being able to check assumptions and ideas you have about what that community that you might be going across an ocean to work with, to learn how to listen, to learn how to collaborate, to learn those skills, which some of you might be gaining. You might have those skills already. You might have been, raised with those skills. But for me, I know that those are skills that I'm still developing. And had I jumped right into international work out of college, I think I would have been a little concerned with myself. Looking back, I'd be like, whoa, check yourself, Mike. So those, that would just be something I would consider.
That's a great point. But I also, the only reason I'm talking again is because I feel like that applies to any kind of community work, to work in that unlearning and that listening, and building in the self-reflection tools to be able to check yourself. I think any kind of community work at a local or international level, but especially international, just because considering if the situation is that there are even more cultural differences and things like that.
Can I ask a question through my voice? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So I don't know if you've experienced this, Sophia. I spent a year with AmeriCorps before college, and a lot of these people were previously in social work positions or nonprofits, and they oftentimes, a common theme among them was disillusionment. They felt they could go in and like change the world, and they realized how big this issue was, and that it's more of a collective initiative, not just single. And so I guess how do you overcome, all three of you guys, how do you overcome that disillusion factor? That's a complex question. I'm sorry if that's too much.
It's a complex question, but it's a really good one, because I think that burnout, we talk about burnout a lot. It just comes up. And I think it's like it can come up in so many different levels. I mean, it's an emotional one. Like we talked about how personally invested you can get in the work. And so the kind of finding your balance. But I think burnout can also happen when you can really go down these rabbit holes of like, oh my gosh, am I really making a difference today? Because I just saw really a lot of awful things, and I just don't know if what I did today made anyone's life better. I think that, and I particularly saw this with, I'll just kind of maybe get really concrete, like with the community organizing work that we were doing, it's super long term. Like, and I think that's one of the hard parts about the work is that you're really your job is never going to be to solve the problem. Your job is to kind of set it up so that the next generation or the next community leader can take the torch and carry it on. But it's likely that while you will see progress, you're never going to like fully resolve the injustice in the world. So I think that celebrating every milestone became so important. So like, for example, I worked with this neighbor, Claribel, and she first contacted me because there was an abandoned community garden on her corner and it looked like crap. Everybody threw their garbage in it, and she said, what can we do? So her and I, we started really small, right? But we walked the block, we knocked on the doors, we talked to the neighbors. Slowly but surely neighbors started kind of joining in. We pulled all the weeds out, we replanted. It grew and grew and grew until like 2 years later, like she was like writing small grants on her own. She got this really beautiful sign created for the garden. Together we were helping her do these like block parties in the garden, but that just took so much time that if you kind of look at things through like a day by day lens, you can feel kind of burnt out. But I think that what we did was so important. Like, okay, like the sign went up and we threw the biggest party about like a sign, because I think those moments like fill you with a lot of joy, and it's okay. You're going to have a day where you feel like crap about the work, and then you're going to have a day where you feel really great. So try to lean into the great days, and then find your support network of people that can inspire you. They can love on you and on the days when you're like, what did I just do?
Sorry to interrupt, Sophia. Is it the community garden on Burnham or the one on Mitchell?
15th and Mitchell.
Yeah, okay, I know.
Yeah.
It's a nice mural now, right? They like painted.
Yes. It's so amazing. Sorry, I just light up because I seriously I love that garden. So my community garden plot is in that garden, and I don't even like gardening, but I was like, I'm committed to helping this project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you can drive all down Mitchell and you can see like a mural went up on Burnham, 17th and Burnham.
Mm-hmm.
That was also a garden that I worked with that church for. Like these little projects built until like, over the course of 2 years, you like, oh wow, we signage went up in the neighborhood, like it says welcome to Muskego Way, but that just took so much time, and you have to like fight every step of the way. Like the city is like super annoying when it comes to signage, and just to get some like pretty signs in the neighborhood. But
yeah, I've seen everything you just said, so that's really awesome that you're a part of that. That's so cool.
Yes, those neighbors.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's still hanging out. Actually, after this call, I have a little Skype date with some of the neighbors, because it would never have worked if like it wasn't a collective, right? It takes a lot of people. So thanks.
I take a lot of, I think this question is really important, and I think my answer to it is that I found a lot of comfort in both community and history and a lot of things, but like even just recognizing that like you're not the first person to have those questions and that disillusionment, like so many people before you and like alongside you are having those same frustrations and having like grappling with those big questions of how change happens and how to make change and how to be like what your role and your space in that is. And I think it becomes so much like the gravity of it stays important, but it becomes so much less about you when you think about the legacies of people who have been doing this work for a long time and people who have been resilient in communities and paving the way for you to be able to even ask these questions. Like, I think like the history of movement work is really important to know that like we're building on a legacy and we're participating in work that has been happening before us and will happen after us. We're not the only person trying to make a difference. And I think like that's really comforting to know, like, you don't have to do it alone, and also the pressure is not on you to do that. It's just kind of this, it's been this really like affirming reframe for me to think about participating in the work instead of doing the work myself. Also, this is like a really hard thing that I've had to learn the past few years, but just like this idea, like, so I kind of, it sounds harsh saying it, but it's been really helpful for me in a hard way, is that nowhere needs you. Like, nowhere needs you. No one, like, there's people who are doing, like, you can do great work and you can make a difference, and like, you're really important and you matter, and at the same time, like, it's about the collective, and it's not just about you. And I feel like those of us who can get really passionate and can care about things, or I can get like really overly invested or really stressed or really like existential about so many things. And I think like, at least when making decisions, realizing like there's work for me to do, there's ways for me to participate in this work, it's important that I'm doing it, and it's not going to fall apart if I'm not there. That's like, there's so many other, like, and sometimes it shouldn't be me doing the work. Like, there should be other people who should be at the forefront of that work. I don't know if that makes sense, but just like, I often have to remind myself of the perspective of the history and the legacies that we're part of, and like that we're participating in this work, and it's not. That's helped me with the disillusionment a lot.
Yeah, Allison, I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but I remember I studied abroad in South Africa, and I was teaching 7th graders who lived in a township. I spent like a full semester like writing up these liberation lessons, whatever. And I, worked with these kids a lot. And then on my last day at the school, there was like this little ball that was stuck in the gutter, and I was able to, because I was the tallest one, I was able to use a stick to get it out. And I was like, what if that was the biggest impact I had during my time in South Africa? It was like getting that ball out of the gutter. And it might have been like, that might have been my positive contribution during my time, and that's okay. Like, so I think that questioning, does the world need you? Does, me as a person, like, I don't know, and kind of being humbled by that question. Another way that I can deal with disillusionment is, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the jumble in the newspaper, but it's like next to the crossword, and it's very simple. It's just 5 letters, unscrambling it, but I'm very good at it, like very good. And so I think that finding little dumb things that you're good at, because there are some days, especially working in social work and working right now to prevent evictions in St. Louis, where things are getting worse, but if I can do the jumble, I do it every day at work. Finding things that you're good at that might have nothing to do with your work can be helpful. And a final thing is just, I think the more I'm engaged with my clients and with the families, the better I feel. There's something about working with people that's very uplifting for me. And I found times where I'm in a funk are usually times I've spent too much thinking in my own head or at a computer. So being connected with other people is very helpful buffer against disillusionment.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank all 3 of our panelists again, and for those who joined the call, I feel really inspired. It's amazing to hear how, with the work that comes after graduation, it can look so different and feel so different for everyone, but it really comes down to us and how we want to move through that journey, because it's definitely messy and difficult. And for me also, it's been really important to have a network of support around me to keep me pushing through moments that are really difficult. So I want to thank you all again. I did record this session, so I'll post it if you want to share it with anybody else. And congrats to the students for getting through finals. And I hope you're able to enjoy your summer. And I will see you all next semester, hopefully. And thank you again to our panelists.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to reach out for anything. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.